I had never expected my summer job to take such a strange turn. I had signed up to care for an elderly man named Gerald Whitman, who lived alone in a massive, creaky Victorian house on the edge of town. At 70, Gerald had lived through more than most people could imagine. A retired college professor, he was sharp, articulate, and full of old-world charm that sometimes came across as commanding. But something about him intrigued me. He was mysterious, lived in a home filled with locked doors and dust-covered furniture, and spoke very little about his past. My curiosity got the better of me from the beginning. My name is Rachel Donovan. I had just finished my sophomore year in college and needed money for the next semester. A family friend recommended the job, and although it was more isolated than I'd hoped, it paid well. My job was mostly simple: prepare meals, help him with medication, and keep him company. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday night. The storm had rolled in fast, clouds swallowing the sunlight by mid-afternoon. By evening, the wind howled outside like something alive, and thunder echoed through the hills behind Gerald's house. I had just finished cleaning the dishes from our simple dinner, chicken and rice with steamed vegetables, when he asked me to follow him upstairs. "I want to show you something," he said with a voice that made it impossible to say no. I hesitated. Gerald rarely asked for anything beyond necessities. But I followed him up the grand staircase, past portraits of long-dead relatives and walls lined with books older than I was. He led me to a door I hadn't seen open before, one tucked behind a tall grandfather clock. He pulled out a skeleton key from his pocket and opened the door. Inside was a bedroom, dusty yet elegant. It looked like something preserved in time. The air smelled like lavender and old paper. A large bed with a heavy quilt dominated the room, and a window showed the trees outside swaying violently in the storm. "This," he said quietly, "was my wife's room." My eyes widened. "I didn't know you were married." "I was," he nodded. "She passed away 20 years ago. I haven't let anyone in here since. But I think it's time." I didn't know how to respond. The mood was heavy, his voice more distant than usual. I stepped further inside, unsure of what he wanted me to see. "Her letters," he said, pointing to a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. "She wrote every day. Even when I traveled, even when we argued. I haven't had the strength to read them." I looked at the chest, feeling like I was trespassing in something sacred. "Why now?" I asked gently. He looked at me with tired eyes. "Because you remind me of her. Not in appearance, but in spirit." She was curious, brave, honest. A lump rose in my throat. I barely knew what to say. Gerald, this quiet, stoic man, was letting me into the most personal corner of his life. I knelt down and opened the chest slowly. Inside were hundreds of letters, bundled with faded ribbons. I picked up the top one. It was dated 1976. He sat on the edge of the bed, and for the next few minutes, we were silent. I read aloud the first letter, my voice trembling slightly. It was filled with love, regret, memories, and hope. I couldn't help but glance at him. His eyes were wet, staring into something far beyond the room. He suddenly looked at me and said, "Rachel, will you stay here with me tonight?" I blinked. "Here? In this room?" "Yes. Just until morning. I can't be alone in here anymore." Something about his voice made me nod. I didn't feel afraid. I felt trusted. The rain outside had intensified, and I knew I wasn't going anywhere soon anyway. I settled into a large armchair in the corner, still holding the letter. As the hours passed, we read more letters. He told me stories of their life, how they met in college, how they had struggled to have children, how she had passed suddenly from a stroke. With every word, the room filled with their history. The storm outside was relentless, but inside, something was healing. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up around 3 a.m., the storm still raging. I tried the doorknob to leave for the restroom, but it didn't budge. I tried again, twisting it harder this time. Locked. "Gerald," I said softly. From the bed, he stirred. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't mean to frighten you. I locked it from the inside. I suppose I panicked. I thought, if I let you leave, you might not come back." His voice was apologetic, but something in it shook me. "Gerald, that's not okay," I said gently, walking toward the bed. "You can't keep people locked in." He looked down. "You're right. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'll unlock it." But he didn't move. "Please," I said again. After a long moment, he finally got up, walked to the door, and unlocked it. He looked ashamed. "I just didn't want to be alone," he whispered. "Tonight of all nights. It's her birthday." My frustration melted. He wasn't dangerous, just deeply wounded, grieving in a way no one had ever seen. I reached for his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'm here now," I said. "Let's sit and talk." We sat until the first light of morning broke through the clouds. He apologized again and again for locking the door. I told him I understood. That night wasn't about fear, it was about human connection. It was about letting go. From that night on, our relationship changed. I stayed on for the rest of the summer, and every evening, we read a letter together. He slowly became lighter, more open. I learned how he'd shut himself away from the world after her death. How guilt and loneliness had taken root. But together, we pulled him out. By the end of August, he smiled more often. He even began leaving the house for short walks. One day, he handed me a letter, one he had written himself. "To my wife," he said, "and to the young woman who reminded me how to feel again." I read it quietly, tears streaming down my face. His words were honest and full of acceptance. The pain was still there, but it had softened. When I left to return to school, he hugged me. "You saved me," he whispered. "You brought her back, just enough to let her go." A year later, I received news that Gerald had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left me a box. Inside were the letters, one more from him, and a note that simply read,